Ethan had always considered his backyard a sanctuary, a perfectly manicured fortress of solitude walled off from the petty dramas of the cul-de-sac. At its heart was the pool, a pristine azure rectangle that represented 5 years of careful budgeting, maintenance, and quiet, solitary enjoyment. It was the only reason he tolerated living next door to the Hollands. The confrontation began not with a knock, but with a trespass. He was floating peacefully on a beige mesh lounger, headphones filtering out the world, when a shadow fell across his face. He peeled the mask of silence away and looked up into the smug 17-year-old face of Blake Holland, Karen's only son. Blake was a specimen of suburban entitlement, lean, tanned, and radiating the careless confidence of someone who had never heard the word no. "Yo, Ethan," Blake drawled, standing a foot inside the clearly marked property line. He held a massive, glittering birthday invitation. "Just dropping this off. We need to finalize the pool schedule." Ethan blinked, slowly sitting up. The cool pool water sluiced off his back. "Pool schedule? What in the hell are you talking about, Blake?" "The party, man. My 18th. "Saturday," Blake said, tossing the heavy card onto the patio table. It landed with the weight of an ordnance, announcing in gold script, Blake's 18th Splash Bash. "Mom said you'd already been notified, but she wanted me to confirm the access points for the caterer and the DJ tent." Ethan's chest went instantly cold, a sensation far sharper than the water. "Access points? Blake, listen to me very carefully. You are not having a party here. This is my property. This is my pool." Blake scoffed, a genuine high-pitched noise of disbelief. "Dude, come on. It's the only decent pool on the street. Ours is like still green from the winter, and you never use yours. Mom said we're borrowing it. She told the whole block like 3 weeks ago." "Your mother informed the block about an event on my property that she never once discussed with me?" Ethan rose, toweling off the water that now felt like oil on his skin. He was 6'2" and carried the quiet, heavy build of a man who worked with his hands, but Blake didn't flinch. "Entitlement was a better shield than muscle." "It's not a discussion, Ethan. It's a necessity," a new voice boomed. Karen Holland herself marched through the gate, which Ethan had explicitly requested she stop using as a thoroughfare. Karen was a force of nature in aggressively tailored linen, her hair a stiff blonde helmet. "It's my son's milestone birthday," Karen announced, her voice pitched at the frequency of a car alarm. She spoke as if reading a proclamation. "Our backyard can't accommodate the sheer volume of people Blake needs to invite. Your yard, however, is a perfect staging area. We only need the pool access from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. Saturday." Ethan felt the rage rising, slow, hot, and dangerous. This was beyond audacious. It was an invasion. "No, Karen, the answer is absolutely not. You can rent a venue. You can use the community center. You cannot, under any circumstances, use my private pool for your son's splash bash. Leave now. Both of you." Karen stood her ground, planting her expensive sandals firmly on his stone patio. "Don't be deliberately difficult, Ethan. It reflects poorly on the neighborhood. We're offering you $200 for your inconvenience." She held up a $20 bill, insulting in its inadequacy. "And we'll hire a teenager to watch the pool, though honestly, Blake's friends are responsible." "Karen, get off my property," Ethan said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, controlled low register. "The next word you say that isn't an apology and an immediate retreat will be followed by a call to the police for criminal trespass." The $20 bill fluttered back down to her side. Karen's eyes, usually calculating, flashed with genuine malice. "You are an antisocial menace, Ethan. I pay my HOA dues. My son deserves this. And just so you know, our surveyor confirmed your retaining wall is 6 inches over the line near the oak tree. If you want to play legal games, I'll tear down your wall, and then we'll see whose property is whose." This was the escalation. The HOA threat was a bluff. The retaining wall threat was real. He had spent months on that wall. "Get out." Ethan pointed toward the gate with a rigid arm. Karen turned to Blake, who just shrugged, utterly unconcerned. "Fine, Ethan," Karen spat, turning her back. "But don't be surprised when the DJ shows up at 11 a.m. Saturday. We'll find a way in. You can't stop 80 teenagers from having fun. You'll be the talk of the town, you miserable hermit." They left, slamming his gate shut so hard the latch rattled. That evening, Ethan was a coiled wire of simmering fury. He called his friend Mark, a junior partner at a property law firm. "Mark, she literally just claimed my pool," Ethan explained, pacing his living room. "She's threatening a property dispute over a retaining wall I built 5 years ago." Mark sighed on the other end. "Look, Ethan, Karen's full of hot air, but that kind of boundary dispute, they drag on, months, sometimes years. Even if you're right, you're looking at $10K in legal fees and a lot of headaches. The party is in 3 days, right? You can get a temporary restraining order maybe, but that's a Hail Mary. Judges hate neighborhood squabbles. So I'm supposed to just let her parade 80 drunk kids through my private space? Can you build a 12-foot barricade in 2 days? No, can you call the police? Yes, but they'll just mediate. They won't physically remove 100 people unless things get violent. It's a civil matter," Mark concluded bleakly. "She knows this. She's counting on you caving to avoid the drama." "I see," Ethan said, the initial heat of his anger replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. "Thanks, Mark. I'll handle it." He hung up and stood silent in the middle of the room. The traditional routes, reason, law, HOA mediation, were too slow, too messy, and ultimately favored the aggressor. He needed an irreversible action. A statement of fact. Blake's party was dependent on one resource he, and only he, controlled: the water. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of meticulous, quiet preparation. Ethan had to move fast, but not nervously. He couldn't risk arousing suspicion. Thursday morning, he called in sick to the construction site. He drove 40 miles to an industrial hardware supplier outside the city limits, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. He wasn't looking for pool supplies. He was looking for drainage equipment. He bought a heavy-duty, submersible 2-horsepower utility pump capable of moving over 4,000 gallons per hour, 50 feet of 4-inch diameter flexible discharge hose, and a heavy-duty, key-locked utility box large enough to house the pump's electrical connections. He paid in cash, signing the receipt with a fake name. He spent Thursday night mapping the drainage. His property bordered a small, dry creek bed that fed into a storm drain 300 yards down the hill. It was the perfect out-of-sight runoff destination. He tested the grade, calculating exactly how he could run the heavy black hose under his fence, through the low brush and into the creek bed without it being visible from the Holland's second-story windows. By Friday afternoon, the setup was complete. The pump was submerged and hidden near the deepest part of the pool under the shadow of the diving board. The main discharge hose was run meticulously along the fence line, obscured by a line of thick hostas and decorative grasses. The connection to the utility box was locked, and the key was safely in his pocket. He even took the extra step of draping a heavy, dark tarp over the pump, anchored by bricks, just in case Blake or Karen decided to take a pre-party scouting mission. Around 5 p.m. on Friday, a new provocation arrived. A group of 4 teenage boys, Blake among them, sauntered out to the Holland's fence line. They were carrying boom boxes and cans of cheap soda. They cranked the music, a bass-heavy, tinny assault, and with infuriating casualness, began tossing a bright yellow volleyball over the shared fence, deliberately aiming for Ethan's pool deck. The first time, Ethan let it bounce. The second time, he walked out, picked it up, and threw it back hard, hitting Blake square in the chest. "You break my pool filter, you buy me a new one, Blake," Ethan warned. Blake recovered, rubbing his chest but grinning. The music was so loud he had to shout. "No worries, man. We'll be extra careful with our pool tomorrow." He glanced knowingly at his friends, and they all erupted in a chorus of mocking, aggressive laughter. That was the last straw. The brazenness of the claim, the calculated disrespect, the total absence of shame. It confirmed his decision was righteous. He didn't just need to stop the party. He needed to deliver a consequence that was as undeniable as it was humiliating. Friday night, 11:47 p.m. A soft, cool breeze blew across the water, rustling the leaves on the maple tree. Ethan stood on his patio wearing dark jeans and a black hoodie, the key to the utility box heavy in his hand. The Holland house next door was dark, silent. the calm before the storm. They were sleeping, dreaming of their triumphant, stolen pool party. Ethan crouched down next to the locked utility box. He slipped the key into the lock, clicked it open, and reached inside, his fingers finding the heavy-duty power switch for the submersible pump. He inhaled deeply, the smell of chlorine and damp earth filling his lungs. This wasn't just an act of property defense. It was an act of emotional preservation. He was protecting his peace. He flicked the switch. Whump! The pump roared to life, a deep, resonant vibration that instantly became the loudest sound in the night. The industrial hose tightened and began to pulse as the immense weight of 10,000 GE. Saturday morning, 10:47 a.m. The silence in Ethan's kitchen was thick, almost unbearable, broken only by the rhythmic drip of his coffee maker. He sat at his counter, perfectly still, nursing a black mug, watching the Holland house through the window over his sink. The waiting was the hardest part, the anticipation of the chaos he had unleashed. The first sign of life from next door was the arrival of the catering van, a huge white box truck that struggled to navigate the narrow suburban street. At the same moment, the sound of a subwoofer being tested echoed from the Holland's backyard. Blake was setting up. A minute later, Ethan heard the back door of the Holland house slide open, followed by Blake's voice loud and excited, directed at his father, Roger, who Ethan knew to be a well-meaning but utterly spineless man. "Dad, check it. The pool looks insane in the sun. It's going to be packed." Then, the excited voice cut off, replaced by an audible, drawn-out sound of confusion. Silence. A beat of pure, heavy stillness. Then came the sound Ethan had been waiting for. A high-pitched, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated shock that quickly morphed into an ear-splitting, furious shriek. It was Karen. "Blake! Roger, what is that? What in God's name happened to the water?" The scream was followed by a panicked, crashing sound as Karen stumbled onto her patio. Ethan watched through the glass doors leading to his own deck as she stormed across her lawn and slammed face first into the shared chain-link fence. "Ethan! Ethan, you miserable monster! Get out here right now!" Ethan finished his sip of coffee, deliberately placing the mug down on the counter with a quiet clink. He pushed his chair back, adjusted his t-shirt, and walked slowly toward his back door, savoring the moment. He stepped out onto the patio, hands casually tucked into his pockets, and gazed at his pool. The sun was now high, illuminating the vast, empty concrete shell. The faded, dirty blue line where the water had met the tile seemed to scream the pool's absence. It looked like a derelict municipal bath, not a backyard oasis. Across the fence, Karen's face was a mask of raw, visceral shock and blinding fury. Her carefully applied makeup looked grotesque, smeared with frantic sweat. Blake stood 10 feet behind her, his mouth agape, holding a plastic inflatable flamingo deflated in disbelief. Roger, pale and blinking, hovered near the back door, looking like he wished he could merge with the siding. "What have you done?" Karen choked out, her voice barely a rasp. "What have you done to my son's party?" "Good morning, Karen," Ethan said calmly, leaning against the rail. His heart was hammering in his chest, but his voice was steady, infused with a cold satisfaction. "I believe you were looking for water? It seems I've run an operational drain cycle overnight. Necessary maintenance." "Maintenance? You drained it? You drained 10,000 gallons of water on purpose? The party is in half an hour." "Where is the water, you psychopath?" "Where I directed it, Karen," Ethan replied, gesturing vaguely to the north side of his property. "My property, my operational facility, my water. I warned you about trespassing, and I warned you about using my facilities. Since you proceeded with your plans regardless, I simply removed the resource you intended to steal. End of discussion." "It's vandalism! It's destruction of property! This is insane!" Karen screamed, shaking the fence violently. Her meticulously planned party, her social standing, and her son's entitlement were all dissolving before her eyes. "Vandalism?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Vandalism is destroying something that is present. I simply removed my property, the water, from my containment unit, the pool. The pool itself is untouched, merely empty. I'm quite certain that's not a crime." At that moment, the situation became publicly humiliating. A teenager carrying a massive speaker the size of a microwave walked through the Holland's side gate, followed by the DJ, a young man with neon headphones who stopped dead, staring at the empty pool next door. Mrs. Holland?" the DJ asked tentatively. "Is the, pool area ready for the setup? We need to place the splash-proof equipment." Karen whipped around, her face crimson. "It's fine. It's a minor delay. Go set up the tent. Blake, do something." Blake, finally snapping out of his shock, pointed a shaky finger at Ethan. "You're paying for this, man. You're paying for the catering, the DJ, everything. You ruined my 18th. Your sense of entitlement ruined your 18th, Blake," Ethan countered, his gaze hard. "I gave your mother ample warning. Now I suggest you ask your DJ to redirect his equipment to a different venue, because this venue is closed." The first guests started arriving, clustering around the Holland's driveway, all dressed in beachwear, carrying towels and floaties. The sight of the massive, empty, dried-out pool was now a public spectacle. Whispers started rippling through the small crowd gathering by the fence. Karen snatched up her phone, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped it. "You have crossed a line, Ethan. You think you're clever, but you're a criminal." "I'm calling the police. I'm pressing charges for public nuisance and theft of utility services." Ethan watched her dial undisturbed. "Be my guest. I've already contacted my attorney, who confirmed my rights as the property owner. You invited 80 people to use a private facility without permission. That's conspiracy to trespass." 20 minutes later, the scene was a full-blown crisis. 2 police cruisers were parked on the street, red and blue lights silently strobing. Officer Ramirez, a calm, middle-aged woman, stood between Ethan and Karen at the property line, patiently trying to untangle the mess. "Let's stick to the facts, Mr. Miller," Officer Ramirez said, looking at Ethan. "Did you intentionally drain your pool last night, knowing your neighbor had planned a large event relying on the use of that pool?" "I performed necessary operational maintenance on my private property," Ethan repeated smoothly. "The pool filter was showing signs of stress after being deliberately targeted with volleyballs yesterday evening. I chose to drain the water to inspect the main line. It's a standard procedure. I gave Mrs. Holland a verbal notification to cease planning her trespass event, which she ignored." Karen exploded. "Lies! It was an act of premeditated malicious intent. And he flooded the whole street. He stole the water. That's an environmental crime." Officer Ramirez held up a placating hand to Karen. "Mrs. Holland, we've already assessed the theft claim. The water came from his property, paid for on his utility bill. The fact that he chose to drain it is a civil matter. It's not a crime to empty your own pool." "But the drainage pipe. He must have flooded someone else," Karen insisted, desperate for any angle. Officer Ramirez turned, her expression suddenly serious. "Actually, Mrs. Holland, that brings us to a slightly more complex issue. Mr. Miller," she addressed Ethan, "while you have the right to drain your pool onto your own property, the sheer volume of water, around 10,000 gallons of chlorinated water, according to the estimate, caused a significant flash flood through the dry creek bed you directed it into. The downstream effects are causing issues." Ethan's carefully constructed composure flickered. He hadn't accounted for the flow rate over the dry ground. "Only the grade. Specifically," Ramirez continued, looking at her notes, "Mr. Henderson, who lives 300 yards down the hill near the main storm culvert, has reported that the sudden rush of water overwhelmed his backyard, washed away his prize-winning rhododendrons, and, more seriously, has saturated the soil enough that his back foundation wall is taking on water. We have contacted the city's environmental team and the HOA about a potential public nuisance violation." Karen's fury instantly transformed into cruel, strategic elation. She pointed a triumphant finger at Ethan. "Ha! You see, you broke the law. You damaged property. You are liable for this. I knew it. Pay the man, Ethan. Pay for the damage and refill my pool, or I will sue you into bankruptcy." Ethan looked past Karen, seeing the first real, messy consequence of his action. He hadn't just humiliated the Hollands. He had caused collateral damage to Mr. Henderson, a quiet neighbor who just wanted to garden. His righteous satisfaction was suddenly mixed with a chilling coldness, the price of war. "I will handle Mr. Henderson's repairs immediately," Ethan said, acknowledging the police. But I will not refill my pool, and I will not pay for the cancellation of your illegally planned event. Karen! Karen advanced, her voice dropping to a dangerous hiss, fueled by the police confirmation of a property damage claim. Fine. Then the gloves are off, Ethan. You're getting sued for public nuisance, and I'm activating the property boundary dispute right now. You think a $200 repair is bad? Wait until my lawyer tears down your wall and files a $50,000 claim for the damage you caused with your vengeful empty pool. You just bought a whole lot more trouble than a pool party. Ethan stared back, his expression unreadable. He had anticipated the legal threat, but not the collateral damage. He looked past her to the cluster of party guests leaving in their cars, the DJ packing up his equipment, and the forlorn, deflated flamingo by the Holland's empty fence. The splash bash was definitively over. You're right, Karen, Ethan conceded, his voice soft but weighted with a strange finality. I did buy trouble, but I didn't buy just a little. When you activate that property dispute, you should know one thing. I have the environmental team's number now, and the discharge hose I used wasn't just dumping water. It was pulling from the very bottom. If they test the sediment in Mr. Hend. The immediate aftermath of the splash bash debacle was a thick, volatile atmosphere of stunned silence and simmering resentment. Officer Ramirez had left, having documented the public nuisance complaint and the property damage to Mr. Henderson's residence, but the legal and emotional shrapnel remained scattered across the entire street. For Ethan, the cold, calculating satisfaction of his revenge was now tempered by the realization that he had opened a war on two fronts: the direct conflict with Karen and the unintended liability he owed to Mr. Henderson. His first move was to contain the collateral damage. By 1 p.m., Ethan was at Mr. Henderson's home down the hill, not with a check, but with a contractor specializing in foundation drainage and landscaping. He took the older man aside on the porch, offering a sincere and quiet apology. Mr. Henderson, I am entirely responsible for the sudden surge of water, Ethan said, his voice earnest. I made a grievous error in calculating the volume and flow rate. I will cover the full cost of replacing your foundation work and every single rhododendron. No insurance claims, no hassle. I'll also pay for you to stay in a hotel while the foundation work is being assessed. Henderson, weary but not angry, looked at Ethan. It's a nasty mess, son. But I heard the screams this morning, and I know Karen. She's been trying to get her way through bullying this whole street for a decade. It's a shame your fight had to come through my yard. Ethan nodded, seeing the opening. I appreciate that, sir. And since the police mentioned the environmental team, you should know that I was forced to drain that pool urgently because Blake and his friends were deliberately damaging my filter line yesterday. I'd just finished an industrial chemical treatment to combat a persistent algae issue. If the city comes asking about the contaminants in your soil, I want you to tell them the truth. You saw my neighbor's failed party and the fact that they were threatening to trespass. I had no choice but to take the risk to prevent further contamination. Henderson's eyes widened slightly, absorbing the depth of the neighborly feud. He grasped the subtle difference. Ethan caused the flood, but the Hollands created the crisis that necessitated the dangerous action. I see, Mr. Miller, I do see. I'll tell the environmental inspector exactly what I saw this morning. And what I've seen this week. Ethan had purchased his liability cleanup and secured his witness in one deft move. Meanwhile, in the Holland household, the scene was toxic and chaotic. Karen was pacing her living room, phone pressed to her ear, screaming into the silence of her ruined Saturday. Roger sat in the corner holding his head, the caterer's bill, a staggering $3,800, crumpled in his hand. Blake was locked in his room, periodically shouting obscenities. I don't care if he cited industrial cleaning. Karen shrieked into the phone. Mr. Peterson, he ruined my son's 18th. We are suing for all associated costs, pain and suffering, and the market value of the pool rental which he deprived us of. And yes, I want the property dispute activated now. Peterson, Karen's high-priced litigation lawyer, was cold and pragmatic. Karen, the party costs are a simple tort, but the environmental issue changes everything. His claim that you initiated the crisis by plotting trespass and harassment creates what we call an intervening cause defense. We can sue him for the pool refill, But if he countersues and brings the EPA down on you for forcing a hazardous discharge, the liability shifts and the fines could be astronomical. We need to neutralize the chemical claim first. How? Karen cried, desperate. We focus on the retaining wall, Peterson said, his voice sharp. It's a clear, quantifiable breach. We file an immediate injunction demanding its removal. This will force him to spend money defending the wall, which he cares about, and give us leverage. We'll drop the pool party suit for now and transition the narrative from a petty neighbor feud to a serious property encroachment case. It makes you look like the responsible homeowner, not the neighborhood bully. Peterson moved fast. By Monday morning, Ethan received a thick manila envelope via process server, a formal cease and desist order and a notice of legal intent to file suit for the immediate remediation, removal, of the retaining wall. Citing the surveyor's documentation, Ethan was shaken, not by the legal complexity, but by the swiftness and precision of the attack. He met with his own lawyer, Mark. She's serious, Ethan, Mark said, sifting through the documents in his downtown office. She's focused on the wall now. She knows that forcing you to tear down a retaining wall is a permanent, visible victory. If she wins, you lose property and incur massive reconstruction costs. She thinks she can win a land dispute after trying to steal my pool and damaging the neighbor with the fallout. Ethan scoffed. It's the legal system, not a morality contest, Mark countered. However, your counter-threat about the chemicals is gold. It's what stopped her from going straight for the pool refill. But we have to make it credible. Did you actually dump those chemicals in? Ethan hesitated. He couldn't confess to his lawyer that he hadn't, that the expired industrial strength treatment was an inspired bluff, a spontaneous escalation in the heat of the moment. He had emptied the dregs of old bottles, yes, but nothing truly industrial. But to admit it was a bluff would remove his only defense against the environmental claim. Mark, Ethan said flatly, meeting his lawyer's gaze, the pool hadn't been professionally inspected in 6 years, and I'd been treating a calcium deposit problem aggressively. Let's just say the sludge at the bottom was extremely concentrated. If the city tests that sediment, the results won't be pretty. They will find heavy metals and caustic agents. Mark nodded, satisfied. Good. We file a counter-complaint today. A $25,000 claim for harassment, emotional distress, and the cost of emergency pool maintenance necessitated by the Holland's criminal trespass. We also explicitly state that the drainage was an emergency measure to prevent the contamination of a large pool area used by neighborhood children, and we cite the ongoing property damage to Mr. Henderson as evidence of the environmental risk they forced you to take. We force her to defend the motive. As the legal war moved to paper, the backyard confrontation did not cease. It merely mutated. The Holland house was now under a social quarantine, shunned by the neighbors who were tired of Karen's drama and secretly admired Ethan's gutsy move. Karen, however, became obsessed. She noticed Ethan had covered his empty pool with a cheap, temporary chain-link fence and posted several large, ugly signs. Danger, hazardous chemical residue. Enter at your own risk. Legal action will be taken. The signs were a deliberate provocation, a constant, ugly reminder of her loss. On Tuesday night, Ethan was working in his garage, reviewing Mark's countersuit drafts, when the lights flickered and died. Not just the garage, but the entire house. He walked outside onto his darkened driveway. The Hollands house was still brightly lit. A sharp, mechanical thunk-thunk sound was coming from the side of his house, near the main electrical box. Ethan moved silently, pressing himself against the cool brick wall. He edged around the corner and saw Blake. The teenager, wearing a black sweatshirt and a malicious grin, was standing on a crate. He wasn't tampering with the main meter. He was using a pair of heavy-duty industrial bolt cutters, calmly and methodically slicing through the thick, armored cable that powered Ethan's detached garage and pool pump. The pump, of course, was silent and disconnected, but the symbolic act was clear, a hostile, aggressive invasion of property, intended to paralyze Ethan's ability to maintain his defense and to deliver a clear message of physical threat. Blake had been driven to pure vandalism by the humiliation of his ruined party and his mother's desperation. Ethan pulled out his phone, flipped on the video camera, and let it run. capturing Blake in the bright glare of the streetlight, cutters in hand. The thick cable already severed and sparking faintly. "What are you doing, Blake?" Ethan's voice was calm, cutting through the silence of the night like ice. Blake whirled around, dropping the cutters. His face, usually smug, was etched with instant, terrified panic. He stammered, pointing uselessly at the severed wire. I thought it was the fuse box, man. I was just trying to fix the power." "No, you weren't," Ethan stated, stepping fully into the light. He held up his phone, showing Blake the clear red recording light. "You were committing criminal mischief, destruction of private property, and trespass, all while being on camera. This is not a civil dispute anymore, Blake. This is a felony." Blake scrambled off the crate, trying to flee. Ethan didn't stop him. He walked over to the severed wire, then looked across the fence at the Holland house. The curtains in the main window were pulled back an inch. He knew Karen was watching. Ethan didn't call the police immediately, not yet. He had a video, a severed cable, and a desperate caught perpetrator. He had the definitive catastrophic leverage he needed to end the legal war and perhaps finally achieve true peace. But first he had to use it to corner Karen. The morning after Blake's reckless act of vandalism, the severed power cable lying starkly against the concrete foundation dawned cool and clear. Ethan didn't bother repairing the cable. The damage was proof. He stayed home from work, using his time to carefully back up the video evidence to 3 separate secure locations. At 9:00 a.m., Ethan sent a text message to Karen Holland, bypassing the shouting matches and lawyer letters. The message was concise, cold, and entirely devoid of emotion. "Karen, I have irrefutable video evidence of Blake committing a felony on my property last night. The district attorney will charge him as an adult, given the severity. You have until 10 a.m. to meet me on my front porch, alone, to discuss his immediate future. Bring Roger. Do not bring your lawyer. If I see a car I don't recognize, the video goes to the police station first, then to the local news. The clock is running." The effect was instantaneous. 10 minutes later, Karen and Roger appeared on his porch. Karen was wearing a silk robe and a frantic energy. Her carefully constructed facade of entitlement had cracked, revealing raw fear. Roger, usually invisible, looked haggard, his face ashen with anxiety. They stood huddled together, 2 people realizing they had finally overplayed their hand. Ethan opened the door and gestured them into his quiet, organized living room. He didn't offer coffee or pleasantries. He stood by the fireplace, keeping a comfortable distance, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp and unforgiving. "Ethan, this is harassment," Karen hissed, trying to regain control. "We are not discussing this without Mr. Peterson. You have no right to threaten a minor." Roger interrupted, his voice thick with fear. "Karen, shut up. Ethan, please. He's 17. This can't be a felony. You can't ruin his life over a few cut wires." "He is 17 and a half, Roger," Ethan corrected calmly. "He's 3 months shy of full legal majority. And in this state, cutting the primary electrical feed to a home, even a secondary one with industrial tools, is grounds for felony criminal mischief, especially when preceded by weeks of documented neighborly harassment and threats. The video is extremely clear. He's looking right at the camera, and he's wearing his University of Florida sweatshirt. I believe he's applying there, correct? I'm sure their admissions committee would be very interested in this evidence." He walked over to his television and inserted a thumb drive into the back port. The screen flickered to life, showing the grainy yet undeniable night footage. The thunk-thunk of the bolt cutters echoed eerily through the silent room. Blake's malicious grin as he realized the power was dead. His subsequent terror when Ethan spoke. The video played for a minute, then Ethan paused it, focusing on Blake's pale, caught face. "That is his life right there," Ethan stated, turning to face them. "A future of having to check the box for felony conviction on every job application and lease agreement for the rest of his life. A future I can deliver with a single phone call." Karen swayed slightly, Roger placing a supportive hand on her arm. The legal threat about the pool was cold. The threat to her son was primal. "What do you want, you monster?" Karen whispered, the word stripped of its usual venom, sounding instead like a desperate plea. Ethan finally moved, placing his hands on the mantelpiece. This was the moment of complete, unassailable leverage. "I want peace, Karen. the kind of peace that can only be purchased with complete, unequivocal surrender. I want to live in a house where your family does not exist to me. This is my offer. It is non-negotiable, and the deadline for acceptance is the time it takes for you to sign the documents I have prepared." He listed the terms, his voice measured and utterly devoid of mercy. 1. The restraining order and the notice of intent to sue regarding the retaining wall, the property line dispute, and the pool party costs, all of them are dropped and dismissed by your attorney today. You will sign an affidavit stating that your family attempted to unlawfully claim my property for your use and that all subsequent actions were retaliatory on your part. 2. You and Roger will pay for the entirety of Mr. Henderson's property damage, including the foundation repair, the landscaping, and his hotel stay. I will forward the invoices to you. This is an admission that your family's reckless behavior necessitated the emergency pool drainage that caused the flood. 3. You will pay for the repair and replacement of my utility box and the severed cable. You will also sign a legal agreement, a notarized permanent easement, that legally acknowledges my retaining wall as the final, immutable boundary line, forever waiving your right to contest it or demand its removal. Karen shook her head violently. The easement? No. That's permanent. And the affidavit? We'd look like fools to the HOA. You already look like fools, Ethan countered, his eyes flashing. You invited 80 people to a party in an empty hole. You attempted to destroy my home's utility lines. The HOA is already whispering about the police lights from Saturday morning. This is about preventing a police record, not preserving your reputation. The easement guarantees my peace. If you refuse, I call the police and tell them Blake was acting on your instruction to cripple my home's ability to defend itself from your civil suit. Roger looked at Karen, his weak facade finally crumbling into a desperate demand. Karen, we do it. We sign whatever he wants. I will not watch my son face jail time. We'll pay it. We'll sign it. You are giving away property rights, Roger, Karen screamed, turning on her husband. You tried to steal a swimming pool, Karen. You started this war, and now our son is the collateral damage. I'm done. Roger's voice broke. He turned back to Ethan. Where are the papers? Ethan retrieved a thick folder from the table. It contained a notarized release of all claims, the perpetual easement agreement, and a document for a 5-figure wire transfer to Mr. Henderson's contractor. Roger, you signed the release and the easement. Karen, you will call Mr. Peterson right now on speakerphone and instruct him to withdraw the suit and confirm to me that he has done so. Karen stood paralyzed, her chest heaving. This wasn't just losing. This was a complete, public, and documented capitulation, enforced by the devastating reality of a mother watching her son's future dissolve. She looked at Ethan, the quiet, antisocial neighbor she had dismissed as weak, and saw only a cold, methodical enemy who had anticipated every one of her moves. With a final, broken whimper, she pulled out her phone. Peterson, she choked out, her voice barely recognizable. Withdraw the retaining wall suit. Withdraw the harassment claim. Withdraw everything. Tell him we've reached a settlement. No, I don't care about the terms. Just do it now. Yes, the easement is part of the agreement. Just do it. She hung up and slammed the phone onto the coffee table, while Roger quickly scrawled his signature onto the documents, the hand that held the pen shaking violently. Karen stared at Ethan's empty pool through the window. It stood as a permanent scar, a monument to her defeat. Ethan watched them sign, then carefully removed the thumb drive. Thank you for your cooperation. You have bought your son's freedom. Do not ever, not even once, address me, look at me, or trespass on my land again. If I hear one word about the HOA, about my pool, or about Mr. Henderson, the police get the video. As Roger helped Karen stumble out the door, defeated and humiliated, Ethan had achieved more than justice. He had achieved total victory. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. Peterson just called. Suit is withdrawn. What the hell did you do, Ethan? Ethan looked at the quiet street, then back at the severed power cable. He had started the war with a drained pool, and he had ended it with a video. He walked to his empty pool, picked up the bolt cutters Blake had dropped, and tossed them into the center of the deep end, letting them clatter against the exposed concrete. The empty pool was no longer a symbol of loss. It was a moat protecting his sanctuary,